Testing. Okay. Should be okay. Hello, everyone. Well, thanks for joining. Um, yeah, if you're just joining in, go ahead and introduce yourself on the chat, on the YouTube chat. Where are you from, and all that stuff, and then we can get started. There's not much agenda for this talk because it's more of a Q&A kind of thing. I'll go over some of the things, but then it's more of a question and answers. All right. So if you had any question, I'll go over a couple of things, but then after that, if you have questions, yeah, make sure to ask those questions right there on the YouTube chat. All right, we still have a couple of more minutes, and then we'll get started. All right, so we have people joining in. We have from Istanbul, Turkey, from Bangladesh, from India. Very nice. Never really went to Istanbul. Always wanted to go there. It's a beautiful place, I've heard, and hopefully one day. All right. Keith Weiss is from Denver, Colorado. I was actually just planning my trip to Denver, Colorado in July. I've already been to Denver, Colorado pretty much like 100 times. Every year we go to Colorado, but I wanted to go to Maroon Bells and Telluride. So still planning. I don't know if I'm going to go or not, but yeah, that's going to be a good trip. From Nepal, from Pakistan, USA, UK. All right. Well, thanks a lot, everyone, for joining. We'll give it a little bit, maybe a couple of more minutes, and then we can. I'm in Houston, Texas, USA. So I'm in Houston. Weather has been pretty cold, which is nice. I like cold weather, but I think that's just going to end today. I think now it's going to start heating up. Yeah, we pretty much every year we go to Colorado, Keith. I think in December. Yeah, for the Christmas break, we went to Estes Park. I've already been there like a million times, but it was nice. It was very nice over there. Yeah, so it was nice. Yeah, this time I think I'm gonna. If I go, I'll probably go to Silverthorne area, Aspen, Ouray and all that. I've never been to Ouray, so probably go over there. So it's gonna be long driving. If from Korea, from Montreal. Okay, I think we should probably get started. Thank you everyone for joining. This is more of a question and answer session, but before that, let's first talk about why I'm hosting this, and what will be a small agenda. I'll talk about some code. I'll show you some code, and and then question and answer. Whatever your questions are, just post it on the YouTube chat. I'm looking at it, so I'll be able to read those questions. All right. So last week, if you're not paying attention, so here it is. You can see the screen on Twitter. Sean Allen, who is awesome and who creates a lot of videos and all that stuff, he tweeted. I think this is where it kind of like every year, you know, we have these discussions of what kind of architecture uh, you're using in SwiftUI. And obviously, there's no one answer to the architecture. I mean, it really depends on, what kind of thing that you're building, what kind of project that you're building. But basically, Sean was also talking about the same thing. He was saying that he he's he went back to work on some project that was using the classical MVVM, and he was having some he didn't like it, basically, all right, to put it in nice words. And then you can follow this thread and all that stuff, all right. And a lot of people then, if you just search on Twitter, a lot of people then start posting the same kind of issues that they're also having. All right, like SwiftDev, he talked about like stop using MVVM and all that stuff. And I think there were some other people also who were talking about. I also chimed in, as you can see, but there were a lot of people, other people talking about kind of like the same thing. All right. So what I want to do is I want to kind of like go over kind of like the classical approach of MVVM, how people do it, because even with MVVM, there are so many different ways that people use this pattern. All right. So I mean, I'll show you a couple of different ways, and sometimes people will just use the terms differently. Sometimes they will call it controllers or the other stuff. Um, but I'll show you like a classical way that people use MVVM and what kind of issues that you can get with those things. All right, and how can you go for more simpler architecture? Probably like we can even call it like a built-in SwiftUI architecture. And if we have time, we can also go over uh, SwiftData a little bit, because SwiftData architecture is a little bit different. All right. Yeah, so there were a lot of more posts. I mean, I think it just keeps on filtering, so I can't really find more of these. But if you just search for MVVM and SwiftUI, I think you'll be able to find like a lot of posts. All right, I think if I say top post, you might be able to see something over here. Like James over here is talking about, he's working on real apps that he created it without the view model approach, and and it was much better for his use case. All right. So there's a lot of other talks actually you can see. So just search and you'll be able to find it. Okay. So let's take a look at, now that we know what we're talking about and why I'm hosting the session. Let's go ahead and take a look at a very simple app. It's a very simple app. Okay. And I'm showing you this. Let me actually make sure that the font is big enough. Is the font good enough? I mean, I don't think I'll be writing much code, but you should be able to read the font. So let me know if you can read the font. It should be big enough now. It's pretty big. All right. Okay, so this application, which is literally just two screens, by the way. All right. Um, so this particular application is doing a couple of things. It's listing all the movies, as you can see, and it's also allowing the user to add the movies. Okay. Now, this is not the only way to use MVVM. All right. Now, I'm sure that somebody will come up and say, well, I don't really use it this way, or I don't really use it that way. And that's perfectly fine. But I think maybe we can all agree this is one of the most common ways. All right. So what we have over here is we have a screen, which is basically a view. And for that particular view, we have a corresponding view model. So movie list screen has a movie list view model. Okay, I mean, I think that's usually what people do. Then we have a add movie screen, which is also view. And for that, we have add movie view model. All right, so we have two screens, we have two view model. I'm calling it screens, I'm not calling it views, because a view can be a reusable small component, right? I mean, if you are displaying a list, then you can say movie list view. So that can be kind of like a reusable view. But the screen over here is much more bigger item, kind of like the actual screen, the container, which contains other smaller subviews. Okay. And if we start over here, like this is a movie list screen, you can see that we're creating the movie list view model. We get the stuff from the movies from the view model, and we call this in the task modifier fetch the movies and so on. All right, so that's pretty normal stuff that people do when they're using Mvvm. All the code that you have for like validating the user interface, all of that can be, can go inside the view model. Okay. Now we have two screens. We have two view model. What happens if I add another screen? Like let's say that right now we have movie list screen, which is movie list view model. I mean, I think that's the most common way people, add movie screen will have add movie view model. What about if I add more screens? What if I add another screen called movie detail screen? Maybe I want to show some details about the movie. So that should be movie detail view model. Maybe updating the screen, update movie screen, and then it will be update movie view model. All right. I mean, I think that's the most common way, at least, right? I mean, that's not the only way, but I think that's the most common way. All right. If you're using classical kind of like a MVVM approach. Now, the problem with this approach is, well, obviously, you're tying a different view model, a separate view model for every single screen. So if you have 50 different screens, you have 50 different view models. All right. And that can become very hard to manage. The other thing that you will realize is inside the view model itself, whether it is movie list view model or add movie view model, you don't really have access to a lot of different things like focus state. You don't really have access to the focus state, so can't really use that. You don't really have access to fetch request. This is for core data. So, you can do that. So Manish is saying, I still use clean architecture. Well, definition of clean can be very different, right? I think we should be using the most simplest architecture to get the job done, which is also leveraging the strong points of the framework that you're using, which is SwiftUI. So you can create like 20 different layers and pass the data through all those 20 different layers and call it a clean architecture. But we just created all these layers for nothing. All right. And query also. Remember, you cannot really access query, and I think you cannot access app storage, right? I mean, or can you? I don't know if you can access that or not, but we have SwiftData over here. App storage is like a user default. So all of these different things, you will see that you won't be able to access inside a view model. Another problem that usually comes with creating separate view models for every single screen is, what about the environment object? I mean, environment object and environment, all those things. What about that? How do I share data? So how do you share data? I mean, that's a question for you, all of you. How do you share data? How do you share global state? If you're using the movie list view model, add among the view model, how do you share the state? If you're using view models, what is your choice of sharing state, like a global state? All right. Let's say that I'm saying that, well, movies should be available to all of them, like add movie screen, movie list screen, update movie screen. All of that should have access to a list of movies. All right. All right. So that's another, that can become a problem also, because you can't really use environment object inside the view model itself. Okay. So that definitely messes up things. Okay. So again, going through this, if we have a screen, and I'm noting it right over here, in a classical way, I'm not saying in all the MVVM approaches. I've seen some very different MVVM approaches. But in a classical sense, when we talk about MVVM and view models, one view model is for one screen. All right. Now, If you are creating one view model and you're using it in 20 different screens, then you're the exception. That's not the normal way people will use, MVVM. If you're using it, that's fine, but that's not normal to do that. Okay. Okay. So, so these are the couple of problems that we have, or at least what I face, especially with the terms of creating a separate view model for every screen. Not every view, every screen. I mean, every view will be crazy. I mean, I can have like 30 different reusable views, and we're not going to create 30 different view model for every single view, but every single screen. And to how to communicate the stuff between them, right? I mean, there can be so many things you can do. You can do combine, you can do, you can use callbacks. I think in this code over here, if you look at it in a sheet, right? When I click on this add movie, it opens up this sheet and I can type in the name of the movie. So I can say new movie and whatever the year is, and I can add. And when I add, it kind of mimics the API. It waits for like 2 seconds and then it adds the movie right there. Okay. So what is going on over here is that the movie collection, like an array of movies, is handled by the movie list view model. So if you go to movie list view model, that has an array of movies. And only movie list view model has an array of movies. So when you add something, when you show the add movie screen, then add movie screen eventually fires a callback giving you the new movie, which is added to this. All right, so that's kind of like the way that this is working. I'm sure there are other ways. I mean, you can pass in a binding and then you can update the binding. You can use a closure. You can use an on change event. You can use combine. Okay, there's so many different ways, right? And the add movie view model, it simply adds the movie and then kind of like returns it because it doesn't have that collection. I guess you can pass a collection, but it doesn't have that collection. That collection of movies is not really being shared. All right. So that's one of the ways, not the only way, but that's one of the ways. And what happens is that since every single of these view models that we are creating is an observable, it's basically a source of truth. So for every single screen, we are creating a different source of truth because every single screen is managed by a different view model. And that causes some issues with refreshing or re-rendering the UI. The UI can become out of sync. Sometimes you will see that, oh, you added the movie, but the list is not, updating, or maybe you're deep into the hierarchy and you need that global movies array and you don't have access to that. So now the question is, well, how can we improve this or how can we change this? Okay. All right. So let me show you how I create the apps. Now, again, I'm not saying this is the only way. As I'll show you, if I'm using SwiftData, it will be very different. But most commonly, when I'm using or I'm building any API, any apps that are accessing an API, this can be a JSON API or XML API or some sort of a API. I usually try to find out what does movie list screen, add movie screen, what are they working on? Like what kind of a data do they need, right? All of these different screens that we have, like 4 different screens or 30 different screens about movies, what are they working on? What's the type of data do they need, right? And then I find out, well, all of them are working on a single thing, movies. So if the source of truth is a single thing, which is they just want the movies, why don't we just give them the movies? All right. So let me show you. I'm going to probably use a different, instead of typing the code over here. Oh boy. Let's see over here. Let me just pull up the code I've already written so we can save a little bit of time probably. Okay. And let's see. Okay. So this is the code that we originally have. All right. every single screen has a different view model. Now, be very careful because I'm sure you'll have questions and you'll be like, oh, you just changed the name. All right. I know you're going to have asked that question, but I'll explain to you. All right. So I'll go over there now. Okay. So we have HTTP client, whatever. It's all fake. You can see it's just returning an array of movies. Now look at the over here. I've actually removed the view model. This is the finished product, or this is the finished code where I've removed the view model, and I'm showing you what I do. Now, it may work for you, it may not work for you, but the one thing to notice over there is that I still have two screens, movie list screen and add movie screen, right? I still have two screens. I haven't really added any new screens. And I know that both of these screens will need movies. And that's it. They will work on movies. That's the bounded context. Bounded context means that from a business point of view, these uh, these two, well, from business point of view, we can create something that can work with the movies. Movies. So I created this thing, and I call it store, but you can call it anything. And I think this is where some of the confusion lies. Is some people will call it store, some people will call it controller, some people will call it model. But the first question that usually people ask over here is that, hey, did you just change the name from view model to movie store, and now you think you have something different? So that's the first question people ask, right? All right. And I think that's the most difficult thing to explain because I have to go back and I have to kind of like copy these things again. I'll copy it over here just so that you can see the old way and the new way. All right. In the old way, we had four screens. Okay, let's just say that we have four screens also. So I'm just going to copy it. I wonder if there's a way to easily copy these things. I'll just do it over here. And I'll just type over here Mvvm. All right, classical Mvvm. I have to type like classical because this is like, okay, and I'll over here, I'll just say, whatever. I mean, I don't even want to call this any pattern. So I'll say SwiftUI built-in pattern, or you can call this like MV pattern if you want to. I mean, that's how I do it, but I'm sure there are different, different interpretation of these things. Okay, now I'm going to remove all of this. Okay, all right, so now I think you can probably see a little bit of a different thing. All right, so I think James is also joining. So he's a really good developer. Check out Trading Journal, right, James? Trading Journal app. James has written also about it and talked about this. Okay, okay. So this is a classical approach on the top, and this is SwiftUI built-in pattern, MV pattern, whatever you want to call it. The name doesn't really matter. But we still have four screens. And these screens are saying, hey, movie list screens saying, hey, I want to get all the movies. All right, I want to get, well, where do you get the movies? Well, why don't you just go and ask movie store, get the movies from there. Add movie screen is saying, hey, I want to add a new movie. Well, why don't you go to the movie store and get it? Movie detail screen is saying, hey, I want to show some detail or fetch. Maybe it needs to fetch some details. Maybe for the movie list screen, we fetched only like the title and the description, and maybe we need some other information. Why don't you go to the movie store and fetch it? You want to update? Go to the movie store. See that? Movie store, or whatever you want to call it, it doesn't really matter, is about movies. Everything to do with the movies. And I only have two functions over here, loading the movies and adding a movie, but you can have other things over here also. Like maybe you want to deal with my movies, like maybe you favored a movie, like, anything to do with the movies, you just talk to the movie store. Now, at this point, usually people ask, well, what if I'm doing like a lot of stuff with the movies? Would this movie store becomes extremely large, yeah, so what? I mean, if it becomes extremely large, then what? I mean, all the responsibilities of handling the movies are still in the movie store, right? So if you are filtering, if you want to filter the movie, you can add a, let's say if I have a function over here, filter movie, and I don't know, like search movie or whatever you want to do, search movie maybe, and you pass in the name of the movie that you want to search, and maybe it will return an array of movies or things like that, right? So you can do something like this. Now over here, I'm returning something because I think when you search, you don't really do adding, or you don't really change that particular array. You just return those things. So DJ is saying MV pattern. You can call this MV pattern. I mean, I call this SwiftUI built-in pattern. I call it MV pattern. Um, I think you can have, you can call this anything you want. I know that when people talk about MV pattern, they're like, oh, we're just going to put all the stuff in the view. And that's not how I see it. And that's why I said that there are so many different variations of these things. All right. Carlos is saying, can you have multiple store for different sections of the app? Absolutely. Absolutely, you can have that. So another example for our stores, I mean, what other things we can have for the movie? I mean, maybe you have your users. And that's why you need like a little bit more domain knowledge, right? So I'm just gonna go ahead and create a new file. Let's say user store. Again, the name, don't worry about the name store. You want to call it movie controller, movie whatever, movie manager, everything is fine. All right, all the things are fine. I call it store. It doesn't mean that you have to call it store. All right. Okay, now another thing before I go to the user store is, if you're building a small application or if even a mid-size application, there's a good chance that one store will be enough for you. Okay, so let's see. I mean, maybe our application name, maybe we're building some application for Blockbuster. Blockbuster is a store in US where you can rent out movies. I think it's all closed, by the way. I mean, it's they filed for bankruptcy. That's a bad example, but we'll take that. So if you're building something, I mean, I don't want to use Blockbuster actually. Let's call it Simple Movie, all right? So if your website name is, or if your app name is like Simple Movie, all right, or something, you can just create a Simple Movie store and put all the stuff in there, okay? Like you can handle, or simple store or something, I mean, I think I'll take the example of food truck because food truck uh, was um, one of the example that Apple was giving. So if we had, let's say that you're building something with food trucks, all right, so I'm just going to code it over here, by the way. Food truck store. And this is for, I'm going to say that if your app is like a small or even a medium size app, it really depends what you're doing, uh, then you can actually do that. And I'm not going to write the code that will probably compile, but I'll try my best. Okay, so this can manage trucks, maybe, okay, trucks. And I'm commenting it out because I don't really have any trucks, but I think you get the idea. Maybe food truck also handle food itself, foods. I don't know, whatever the plural of food is, foods. Maybe food truck sells something special. Um, you know, top food, stop, whatever. Basically all the state of your application can just go into food truck store if your application is small or medium size. Actually, I'm sorry, let me go through some questions. Doing the same, I just created the store name view model with different modules. Okay, yeah, that stuff with Naving or Mvvm can do different things. I've seen flow. Okay. So not really any question, but I think comments. Thank you. So if you have a small or medium size app, you can just start with one store and that's it, or whatever you call it, just one. and handle everything in there. All right. So, trucks can be there. I mean, foods can be there, and all of these. All right. But let's go ahead and create user store, right? So I'll create something called user store. Again, you will have to, do all of those different things. You know what I'm talking about. And then user. So user store, if you're working in a large app, then you can have user store, movie store, catalog store, fulfillment store, product store. I don't know, a lot of stores. All right. Um, and they will get the data from somewhere. All right. So you can divide these things, but the important point to note over here is that you're dividing these things not because you added 30 different screens, but because now you actually needed a source of truth. You needed to manage the movie, so you created the movie store. You needed to manage users, so you created the user store. All right. So let me take one question over here saying, can it be a situation when you need to pass data between stores? So that's a very good question, all right? That what about if stores want to communicate with each other, all right? And there are multiple ways that you can do that. So let me actually show you how you use these things, because I know we are creating these things, but how do we actually use them, or how I use them, okay? All right, so let me first, yeah, I know, thank you for all the questions, but let me first show you how do you use it. All right, so we created the movie store, we created the user store. How do we use the movie store? Again, you have many different choices how to use it. Usually what I do, I just inject it right here as a global state. Dot environment, what is it called? Movie store, and then pass in whatever the HTTP client is. I mean, just make sure that you use a factory to create the correct HTTP client and all that stuff. All right. Environment, what's the other one? User store. There we go. Now, if you're building an application which has tabs, right? So how do we get to an example over here? If you have an tab, right? Maybe over here you have users, maybe over here you have movies. Then in that tab part, you can inject the user or movie store, and in the other tab, movies tab, you can inject the movie store if that tab only deals with the movies, so that you don't have to inject it at the root level. You inject it at a particular tab level. Okay, so you can do that also. But usually in my applications, I just inject it at the root level. So every view now has access to the movie store, and every view has access to the user store. Okay, so that's how I use it. And well, how do you use it? I guess you can go to, where's our view? This one. I think I already have the code over here that's using it. You just grab it from the environment, and then you just start using it. And this makes it so over here we have our movie store. It's just getting the movies. And when we want to add the movie, the add movie screen simply gets access to the store, and then just add the movie to the store. It doesn't have to do any callbacks or any other stuff. It just adds it to the same store. And the good thing happens when you do that is, since the same movie store is used by movie list screen, the movie list screen gets reevaluated and re-rendered if necessary. And all the other screens that are actually using the movie store, not using the movie store, but actually using the properties of the movie store, will get, reevaluated and re-rendered. And that means your uh, whole user interface is synced correctly. Okay, so that's a really good thing. Now let me go through some questions. That's a really good question from Roma German. Can it be a situation where you need to pass data between stores? Yes, there can be some situations. All right, so let's talk about that. We have to get a good situation for those things. All right, so let's say, and can I just create one file and I can write all the stores in there? Don't do that, but I'm just going to do it over here so that I don't have to create separate files. Okay, so let's consider a situation, all right, that we have a user, I know it's kind of like weird, but user management store. And yeah, this is observable and all that stuff. Import, what is it called? Observation and main actor. User management store deals with users. It has all the functions for users. Forget about the user store for a second. This is a different example. It will have functions like to get user, you know, by something, I guess, by source SSN or something, and all that stuff. But then there is another store called the insurance claim store. Okay, maybe insurance claim store. All right. And it has, well, the insurance claim store needs like user information, right? I mean, so if we say get insurance claim or, whatever, file, and I'm just making this up on the fly, and file insurance claim, and you need to maybe send in something in there, all of that stuff. So in this case, what we want to do is we want to communicate, because insurance claim store now needs some information from the user management store, right? Insurance claim store needs some information um, about the user, so it needs to use the user management store. Now, there are so many different variations you can do in this case. You can, that's the first one, you can allow it to pass the user management store as a dependency. You can do that. That's one option. The other option is, how did the user management store got the information, right? I mean, how did the user management store, I mean, I'm sure user management store use some sort of HTTP client, right? So use the same service user management store use to get the info about the user, and then pass or use the user information to file the claim. So that's one. It's kind of like microservices, okay? Kind of like microservices. The other one is you can go to the screen. Let me create a new one probably. Insurance claim screen. And over here, you can actually use multiple ones. So you can use the user management store, user management store, I'm just typing it out. And you can use another one. What is the other one called? Insurance, right? Insurance claim store. Insurance claim store. And then you can use, file a claim or whatever, file a claim. You can use one store to get the information, user management store dot get user, and this is going to return you the user, and then you can use whatever, like say, what is it called? Claim store dot file claim, and then you pass in the user. Kind of like that. I know it's all like messed up, but kind of like that. You can use it. That's another way that you can do that. So in your use insurance claim screen, that screen will work with two different stores. All right. So that's another way you can do that. DJ has a question, but in large project, if we have many stored classes and use them as environment object, aren't they bad since they are used as singleton and will consume a lot of memory? So they won't really consume a lot of memory even if you inject it at the environment. They're not really singleton because environment object is only available at the point of injection. So it's not like everyone has access to it. But yes, if you do inject it at the root level, then everyone does have access to it. But even if everyone does have access to it, if you're using movie store, you're probably not going to fetch 10,000 movies. You still need to do pagination, all of that stuff. So if you have 10 different stores, each store has some sort of a collection, and they're storing, let's say, 20 movies at a time or 20 items at a time, So 10 multiplied by 20 is, let's say, what is it, 200? So 200 items or whatever items that you're holding is basically nothing, right? It's basically nothing. 200 items in an array, who cares? All right. So Robert is asking, what is the difference between your stored and a standard view model? I think we went over that in, it's the same thing. Well, it's not the same thing actually. Um, so now the question becomes, well, where do we put the logic that we had in the view model? I mean, with this, if we don't have view models, where do we put the logic for our validation, for our presentation logic, not business logic? This is important stuff, all right? This is business logic. So I'm going to write over here, business logic is in store, okay? But you may have some presentation logic, transformation logic, mapping logic, maybe the data that is coming from the store and given to the view, maybe the view needs to transform that data. Okay, maybe the view needs to do something. Where would that logic go? That logic will go right into the screen. I mean, right into the view. So add your presentation logic, validation logic in the view. All right. Now, when we talk about this, okay, add your presentation logic and validation logic, people usually say, oh, so you're putting business logic? No, no, we're not. That's what I literally just said 2 seconds ago. Business logic is in there. But then you have to differentiate what business logic is. There's a very big difference between business logic and presentation logic. Okay? Business logic are the business rules. Okay? So what are business rules? Let me show you some business rules over here. If I can go and pick up another app, this one. I'm opening this one because so I can show you an actual, well, if I have actual business rules. Budget. Yeah, so this is more of a SwiftData application because I'm showing you because this does have actual business rules. Uh, the property like spent, remaining, these are actual business, exist. These are actual business rules because we need to calculate, this algorithm needs to calculate the correct spent amount in our budget, the correct remaining amount in the budget. These are the domain rules. The domain rule says that the two budget items cannot have the same exact name. So these are the business rules. So what are the presentation rules? Well, anything to do with the presentation. Maybe you're getting the data and it needs to be, presented in a certain way. Like it needs to be maybe mapped to a different struct. You rarely do that, but if you want to do that, you can do it. Maybe if you want to do some validation stuff, you can put it in there. And usually people ask like, okay, if we put presentation logic over here, how do we test it? Right? So this becomes like a different issue, like how do we test this? And most of the time, the logic that I put inside the view is not complicated that requires testing. I know that most of you will be like, hold on a second. So are you telling me you're not testing the logic inside the view? How can you do that? How is it 100% code coverage? Oh my God. And everybody will be going crazy right now. And they'll be like, oh no, what have you done? Why are you not testing it? I mean, I'm not testing it because I don't consider that to be an important thing because it's not really business logic. I would rather spend the time in writing some good integration tests because I'm using HTTP client and good logic tests for the store. Maybe if there is some logic in there right now, it doesn't really look like there's any logic. And I would rather spend the time over there rather than trying to type some trivial test. But if you do want to make some testing, if you want to test your logic in the views, then you can use tools like View Inspector. You can do that. And sometimes what people usually do is, if you're doing something complicated, presentation-wise complicated, then you can also create an internal struct, and yeah, it will be similar to a view model, but I will call it whatever, movie list state, movie list view model, whatever you want to call it. And inside that, add the logic uh, that you want to test. So that's another way that you can do that. All right. Now, what kind of logic we're talking about? Well, maybe you have a property over here and this checks if the form is valid, if you have entered all the things, and you can do that. And then you will simply return true or false over here. And since this is a struct, you can easily test it out. But don't consider this an observable object because it's not. It's not going to make a call to the web service. It's not going to do all of those things. All right. So if you want to do that, you can definitely do that for cases that are complicated. All right. But usually what happens is that the logic that you have inside your view is not really that complicated that you need testing. Usually, not always, usually. But if you do have that case that, oh, it's super complicated, I'm doing a lot of mapping and transforming and my validation is out of control, then you can do that. Okay, just extract the logic out into a struct and test out the struct. All right, maybe you're doing some sort of a sorting, which is like complicated. Yeah, sure, you can extract it out. But remember this, you can call it a view model if you want to, but it's not a view model in sense because it's not an observable object. See that? I mean, I'm not going to go ahead and put an observation over here. It's not going to make a call to the server. It's not. That part is done by the movie store. You can also use view inspector. You can just also test it with UI testing, end-to-end testing. You can do that also. All right, let's go through some questions. Injecting the initial store in the top of the app is useful, but it's not a little bit having a global variable. It's a global state. That's the whole point of the, the movie store. By injecting it over here is we have a global state. And it's kind of like reminds me of Redux global state. And I know that with Redux, you have to create like reducers and middleware and, the dispatches and actions. But in SwiftUI, it's already built in. So you don't really have to do anything. All right. And there's nothing wrong with global state, by the way. I mean, nothing wrong with environment object, which is kind of like a global state if you inject it at the root, because as soon as you add something, as soon as you change something, like this, as soon as you change the movies, since it is an environment object and it's a published property, all the other views which are in your navigation stack, so it shouldn't be that many views anyways, it might be what, 3 or 5 views maybe in the navigation stack if you're using tab bar, or even if you're using a non-tab bar application. I mean, how many views are you going to push into navigation stack? I mean, if you have like 100 views in the navigation stack, then you got some other problems. I mean, what kind of app that you're building that you are so deep in the navigation? So probably you will end up with like, okay, let's just say 10. All right. So if you have 10 views, which is already a lot, like you're going somewhere deep into the hierarchy, then those views will, if that property being observed in those views, then those views will re-render. And that's exactly what you wanted. All right, that's exactly what you wanted, right? Like if I have movie stored over here and I have another property over here, let's say counter 10, whatever, right? And let's say whenever I load the movie, I increment the counter. Now all the views who are using this property in their body will get re-rendered. Why don't we want that? I mean, I think that's pretty cool that they get re-rendered, right? And all the other views that are not using the counter, they will not get re-rendered. All right. DJ is asking then without using an environment object, how to use a movie store in only specific screens. So if you're not using an environment object, how can we use movie store in specific screens? So let's go over here to our state something, state movie list screen. So not using environment object. I believe you can just create it. Does it have to be with a state? I mean, that's you'll have to check it out. But I think you can. We can probably just go ahead and create like a state variable, and maybe somebody can point me if I'm doing it wrong or something. But movie store. But this depends on. You can see this depends on something, right? So over here, you want to you want to make sure that you're using a factory and not injecting it. Sometimes people inject the movie list screen with the store, so you can also do that injection. Like movie list screen will have a, movie list screen. You will have to basically inject it as a dependency injection, so you can do that. Yeah, I think state object you can use that, but I think now it's called state, or you can use state also. All right. But this technique, usually what people do is they don't really do it like this. They inject it into the movie list screen. So if you don't want to use, I think so. What they will do is they'll have a properly property uh, movie store, and you'll have to check that if you have to use that or not. So they do it kind of like this, and then whenever they're creating an instance of movie list screen, they inject it over there. All right. So that's one way to do that, and this is another way. But make sure that you're using some sort of factory to create the client. But the problem with this is it should be okay, I think, because we'll be checking. Yeah, this will be the yeah, so over here you will have to make sure that you inject the right one when you're mocking. Okay. What am I doing wrong over here? Okay, there we go. How can we watch the live again if we missed it? Well, you will. Yeah, once we're done with the recording, I think it will be available on YouTube live. Okay. It is a good thing that the particular screen will have access to the store through the environment. That nothing have to do with that. It's nothing to do with what it's gonna show. Is it a good thing that a particular screen will have access to stores through the environment? That nothing have to do. Yeah, I mean it's global state. Why not? I mean if they have access to it, but they don't have to use it. That's what the global state actually does. I mean, if you look at Redux, which is where all of these global state management come from, you can have like 10,000 different React components, but unless they are connecting to it using the connect function in Redux library and using map state to props and map dispatch to props, they don't have access to it. So if you don't add the environment, if you don't add this, you don't have access to it. All right. I use a factory to inject these as dependencies. Yeah, you can use a factory. I think you will need a factory because when you're doing some sort of end-to-end testing, then you will need a factory to inject the correct HTTP client. All right. But I use this technique, and this technique works pretty very good. And I don't really have to, do anything different to update my screens. They're always updated correctly, uh, and it's much easier because anytime the movie store is changed, all the screens that are using the movie store, they will update if they're using the properties like movie or counter. All right. So you don't have to do anything crazy to update them. It provides them with a single source of truth based on the movies. And you can have more stores. As I mentioned earlier on, you can have a user store, you can have user management store, insurance claim store. You can have all of these stores that are, but I think if you're building a small app or even a medium sized app, just start with one store and name it whatever the name of your app is, store. So that can be a good name. All right. So I guess if I'm building some sort of a personal finance or journal writing app, then I would call it, my journal store, and I will manage everything in there. Maybe later I'll realize that, oh, wait, I am doing different things. I'm managing this and I'm managing that, kind of getting out of control. Okay, then I can introduce separate stores. Let's start with the simplest thing possible. All right. All right. Any other questions? Now, Apple does have a lot of samples, and I know that most people say, oh, you shouldn't be learning from Apple samples, but I look at that as just code. All right, just code. Just there's a code in front of me. I don't care if it's a sample or not. It's just code in front of me. Can I extract something out? All right. And by following those samples, also I learned these kind of techniques which Apple is showing. Apple shows it a little bit differently. I think they just pass the model. They call it the model, and then they pass the model to every single screen or view instead of just putting an environment object. But you can put it in environment object also if you want to, so you don't have to pass it again and again. All right. And another thing, important thing to realize over here is if we look over here, right, this one, it's very important. Like if you want to extract this out, I mean, it's not really big enough to extract, but if you want to extract this thing out into movie list view, because it's listing movies. So let me see if I can extract this out. Where is it? Embed, extract subview, and I will call it movie list view. And we're just going to be passing in movies over here, right? Let movies. So I've extracted the movie list view into a reuse. I'm not calling it screen. I'm calling it a view because it's more of a reusable view. And I can movie list view, pass in the movies. What is the movies? Where is it coming from? Movie store dot movies. This is an important part because you should only be passing the stuff that the view needs. And if you do that, then the tracking, the built-in tracking inside SwiftUI is going to work much better. Now the tracking for the movie list view is based on a dependency on movies. So the movie list view will only get re-evaluated and eventually get re-rendered if something happens to the movies. If you add something to the movie, if you change something to the movie, or something happens to the movies, then the movie list view is going to re-render, all right, or re-evaluate it and then re-render. And that's what you have to do when you are working with SwiftUI. You have to see where you can extract these views out into much smaller views. So right now, I mean, it's a very simple app, but right now I've extracted it out into movie list view. Now some might say, hey, why don't you extract this out also? Sure. I mean, if you want to extract this out, you can say extract subview. And I think over here we can say movie cell view. Just don't go crazy with it. Only extract the things and extract when you actually need the things. All right. So now I can say movie cell view. And look at that. All right. So I have the movie list view where you pass in all the movies. I have a movie cell view where, well, it only displays one cell. The dependency of the movie cell view is on the movie itself. So that's going to allow SwiftUI to track the changes much better, and it's going to make your app much, you know, work much better with high performance. All right. All right. Um, Now, I think I was giving another example. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, so this is, I mean, this is kind of like the uh, overall picture of how I design applications. Now, there are some times, let me see if I can find that. I mean, I don't want to give like confuse you, but sometimes, let's say, sometimes when I'm building things that are not state-based, but they are services, then I will create, you can see that I'm not creating the authentication. This is a completely different project, by the way, all right? So, and this is where you have to sit and think, right? I mean, if you're building authentication controller or something to do with authentication, will that be saving state, or will that be just stateless, authenticate and give you the result? So things that are just stateless, because I don't really want to hold any state apart from the keychain. But if I'm doing some service oriented thing, like I want to authenticate the user and I just want to be done with it. All right. So if I'm doing that, I usually create a struct as a authentication controller. I mean, it depends, right? I mean, this is authentication controller. You can call it authentication manager, authentication service, and so on. It has a login function. It doesn't really have any published, well, it's not even observable object, so it doesn't really have any published properties. And then I kind of like inject it into the environment value, and then I use it. All right. So for service-oriented thing that don't really hold state, that doesn't really have to be reactive so that the user interface can refresh because the state has changed, I use environment values, structs, instead of environment objects or observable objects. For things like data, if I have a lot of data, like movies, where I actually want to update when I get the data, then in those cases, I will use observable. All right, but this is just my thing. I mean, sometimes I also get like confused, like, okay, is this an observable object? Should I be saving this information in memory, or should I be using like a service-oriented things? All right, so it's going to be a learning thing, and I think the most important thing you can do in your project is experiment and try out different things. All right. DJ is asking, in large project, is it okay to have like 50 stores? It depends. I mean, what kind of a project that you're working on? I mean, uh, you have to draw the boundary, and that is why whenever you're creating a store, you have to think about the bounded context of the application. Even in an e-commerce application, you can have you know, like what will happen in the e-commerce application, right? Maybe e-commerce application has a catalog, so maybe we'll have a catalog store. Maybe it has inventory, we will have inventory store. Maybe we will have user store. Maybe we'll have a product store. um, I don't know, fulfillment. Fulfillment is a store or a service? See, I don't know. So fulfillment is maybe a service. It fulfills. Does it hold down any value? I don't know, right? Shipping store or a shipping service. Again, that's why it's so important that you should have you should have a domain knowledge. So even for an e-commerce application, you might end up with like 8 stores or 5 stores. It really depends what kind of application that you're working on. But I would say keep it simple. Start with one store and see how it goes, and then you can add more stores. Um, I am migrating to MV pattern from MV. And the name MV, I know that some people when they read the name MV, they think like, oh, you're just gonna shove everything in the view, and that's not really correct, or at least that's not how I do it. I mean, I think they may be talking about presentation logic, but to be really honest with you, presentation logic most of the time is not that complicated, right? I mean, if it is, then go ahead and extract it out and test it out. But I rarely ever write unit tests for my presentation logic because it's not worth my time. I would rather write tests for my logic, if there is any logic, which we don't, or integration test. And the best test that you can write for your application is always going to be end-to-end test. Always. Because the end-to-end test your application from start to finish, like how the user is actually going to be using your application, all the things combined together. All right. So definitely when you're writing tests, you have to think about that, which tests that you want to write. You can't just write thousands of tests on some or for something that doesn't really, it's trivial, right? We don't care about it that much. DJ Singh, and I guess tons of stored classes should be generated in large projects. Yeah, I mean, you can have stored classes. Depends on the bounded context. Depends on what you're trying to do. Then yeah, you can have stored classes. But make sure that you understand that we creating the store is so that we can provide that particular data to the view. And one store, like movie store, I think we called it over here, right? See that? One store is being used by four different screens instead of the view models where we had one separate view model for every different screen. All right. Now, if you were doing something else with the movies, movie search screen, it's going to use the movie store because it's something to do with the movies. James is saying, I handle this very similarly in the Trading Journal app. There's an authentication service and authentication screen that gets a service from the environment. Okay. When you say E2E test, are we talking about testing using XC test? Yes. So when you say E2E test, when I'm saying E2E test, meaning end-to-end test, which are basically the UI test. All right, UI testing. Yes, absolutely. Those are the best tests to write, but those are also the hardest tests to write because they require so many things to set up. They are also slow, but they're slow because they do a lot, right? So those are the most important tests that you can write. Apart from the domain test. Domain test means testing for anything to do with the store is doing or anything that you're in your Swift data if your model is doing something. So in those cases, all right, right now our model is like this because it's more of a DTO object. I'm not really going to put any business logic in there because this is not the actual domain object. It's just a DTO coming from the JSON. All the domain stuff is, since this is a server client server app, all the domain stuff is on the server. All right. Hopefully we'll get an updated framework for UI test and how they make Swift testing. Yes, Swift test is pretty cool. I mean, hopefully they will do that for UI testing. All right. Um, but no matter what kind of testing tool that you're using, make sure to write good test. I can maybe show you a very small. Okay, this is not something, I mean, this is something that I will have to present, but if we look at these tests, I think these are domain tests, right? Yeah, so these are kind of like a good test. I consider them like good tests. These are domain level tests that I'm writing over here. Look at how the test, the name of the test, depositing using a transfer type charges a fee. Okay, so whenever somebody reads this test, they already know, oh, when we deposit using a transfer, like a bank transfer, it's going to charge a fee. Depositing negative amount is invalid. Withdrawing with insufficient balance results in penalty. Transaction history. And so these are domain level tests, and I think these are very, very important. All right. 0 Point is saying, can you please create one video on clean Swift architecture? I don't know what that means, clean Swift architecture. If you follow the books, they will tell you to make 30 different layers and then they will call it clean. But I think the real beauty of any code that you're writing is the less code you write, maintainable, not like shove it in the view, but the less code you write to that is the much better because in the end, code is always a liability. It's not an asset. So the less is always more. Same goes with the test. If you are writing test, a lot of test for things that doesn't really require that much testing, then you're wasting that effort that can be applied somewhere else. We'll love for the next stream to be on UI testing. Okay. Um, Yes, in the future, probably I'll do a little bit of stream on domain testing, and eventually we can get to UI testing. Yeah. All right. All right. All right, any other questions? So that's kind of like my view on SwiftUI architecture. Um, and and strangely enough, I mean, now more and more people, if you just look at it like online, they are kind of like realizing, I don't know what techniques they're using, but I think it's very similar techniques. They might call their stores controllers, they might call their stores view models, but don't create view model for every single screen. So they might do that. All right. But I think it's good that people are now experimenting. All right. Some are completely ditching, complete 100% view model. They're just putting, depending on their app, they can just use the views and host the information that's divided into smaller ones. So it really depends on what you're trying to build. But you know, that's how it works. Any tips of to adapt this when we have to combine with uh, UI kit views? Um, I think for services like authentication controller that I showed you, you can definitely use. I mean, that's just a controller, so you can definitely use it in UI kit. Stores, I think you can still use observable objects. So everything you can still use in UI kit. All right. I haven't really worked that much with UI kit nowadays, but you can definitely use that. Um, okay, so somebody was asking, Danny is asking, you were mentioning you'll also highlight the implementation where you're using SwiftData. Yes, let me see which app was it. Okay, so this is SwiftData, and this is, by the way, only SwiftData. So this is how I build. Now you can see how different it is, right? This is very different. You might say, well, where are the stores? See that? Where are the stores over here? Oops, hold on a second. Probably have to highlight that. There are no stores. I don't really need stores at this particular moment. So what I do in Swift Data is, and what Apple also does in Swift Data, it's not like I'm inventing these things. Um, I have a budget class, it's model, so that's already Swift, it's going to be persisted using Swift Data. All right, so you can already see how different it is, right? It's not like, oh, I'm just going to blindly going to create a budget store and an expense store and a blah, blah, blah store. No, I'm not creating stores anywhere in my pure Swift data application because I don't really need it. Look at how I implement things. Uh, so this is how Apple does it also, I guess. But you have the budget class, which is the model. You have some properties, you have some relationships, and the actual logic, the domain, the rules, the most important part is inside the model itself. All right. Now, this is a pure Swift data application. It doesn't communicate with the API. It doesn't do any of that stuff. Uh, it's just pure Swift data application. Okay. I added this exists because I know that there's a unique constraint that you can put on the Swift data properties for the models, but that doesn't really do much. It just performs absurd, or it will, I mean, maybe it will not, I mean, it doesn't really do anything or it performs absurd. I think something similar to that. But what I wanted to do is I kind of like wanted to throw an error if you try to insert the same budget twice. And I wrote some tests for it also. So you can see adding duplicate budget name causes error. I created the initial budget, which is vacation. Then I created a duplicate budget. And then I just save the duplicate budget and that will cause an error. And the way that I use it is, well, probably I don't have the UI, but the way that I use it is I just access, all the stuff over here, like queries and all that stuff. If you want to add queries, so you'll just go ahead and use query, and use the model container from the environment. Just a normal way of doing things. So you can do that. All right. So that's how I create my Swift data or pure Swift data applications. I don't really create stores in Swift data application. I don't really need it right now. Maybe I will, but I don't really need anything right now. So I keep it simple. All the domain knowledge, the domain rules, the business rule goes right inside the model itself. This one doesn't really have any rules, expense. This one does have rules. These are all rules. These are the important parts. And these are the things that you should be testing. All right. Roberto is asking for more complex navigation. What do you recommend? Coordinators, navigation links. Um, Navigation is an important thing. I mean, navigation, I've tried out several different things with navigation. I think it's over here. You can definitely read the article I have. Where is it? Navigation patterns. So this is quite a long article that I wrote some time back. You can read about it. The thing is, if you have a very complicated navigation, then maybe you can use the techniques like coordinators and all that stuff. Coordinators and routers and all those things that will help you. I think if you have simple apps, you can just use built-in navigation right inside the views itself. All right, because whenever you're creating these routers and coordinators, they do, it is some effort to create those things. Let me see if I can find the one line of code that I'm looking for over here. Yeah, right here you can see. But I'm not saying that you should use this technique because this technique does have some downsides. First of all, it takes an effort to set it up like this. The second, I don't think it works with binding. So you can see that I created a environment value called navigate. And when I have to navigate programmatically, then I just call navigate and I pass in where I want to go. So over here, I'm going to the patient route, and inside the patient route, I'm going to the patient list. All right. It looks kind of cool, but it requires a lot of setup and it does not work with binding. All right. All right. Any other? So hopefully after watching this, you have a little bit more clear idea of, you know, what the built-in pattern or MV pattern, what people talk about. Some people always say that, oh, you're just going to put all the logic in the view. That's not really what we're talking about over here at all. Yes, the presentation logic will go inside the view, but oh, that's the wrong one. But the actual logic, your domain logic would be in the store. Okay. Um, so that is pretty much it from my side. There are some source resources I can actually see. Let me see if I can. Okay. I can probably upload the code, but the code is, yeah, sure. I'll try to upload the code also. You can always go to adamsharp.com articles. You can read some articles over there. Okay, and I think the biggest article which I just updated, and it was just a small update because I just call it stored instead of the model. So here's the one that you can read. It's a long article. It talks about a lot of different things. So you can definitely read this article. Okay. And if you have not visited my website, Adam Sharp School, you can definitely visit that over there. I mean, I work very hard on creating these courses. And I also do workshops. Like the next workshop that is coming up is, I think, on machine learning. There we go, machine learning. And the other one will be on Swift data fundamentals in May. And I will add some other workshop for like unit testing um, and some other ones that I can't really think of right now. But yeah, I'll add a couple of more workshops also. And also courses. You can see I have like a lot of courses like building gardening apps, Skip fundamentals, SwiftUI architecture, full stack e-commerce app. So all of these courses are also available. You can always go there, check it out, Adam Sharp School. And because you all attended, oh, that's not the correct URL. Let me actually delete that. Okay, and this is the correct URL. And since you all attended over here, I have a special code for you. This one you can use, and you should be able to get like 40% off courses. And this coupon will expire in like a little bit more than 12 hours. I would say, yeah, 15, 16 hours. It's just going to expire by the end of today. All right, let's just make it simple. It's just going to expire by the end of today. All right. So this is the coupon, and probably I should write it down over here. It is 40% off on all courses. So whatever course you want, you're just going to get 40% off. All right. Any other questions that I can answer? See you at Arctic conference. All right. Yeah, I'll see you at Arctic conference. That's great. Yeah, Arctic conference is coming up. So I'll be speaking, well, I'll be doing a workshop on testing at Arctic conference. So yeah, if you are planning to go there, you can definitely check out Arctic conference. It's in Finland and March 11th to March 13th. Yeah. All right. Any other questions before we wrap up? Well, thank you everyone for attending. I really hope that you enjoyed this. Lots of good questions, and lots of things that I learned also. And it's always fun to host these things because it's I also get to learn a lot of stuff. So that's always good. All right. Thank you, Keith. Keith in Colorado, the best places. I think Colorado is definitely one of my favorite places, all-time favorite places to go. So I'll probably be planning a trip over there in the near future. We pretty much go every year, anyways. But yeah, I might just go solo. Thank you, Danny, uh, Roberto, Roma. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Hopefully, you have enjoyed it. And yeah, we're gonna wrap up over here, and I'll it should be available. It's like the recording should be available, so you can definitely watch it. I mean, once we end the stream, code I will update the code, and I will post the code on GitHub, so you can see the code. So that will be helpful, hopefully. All right, everyone. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and hopefully we can do it next time. So again, thank you so much for coming. Bye.